Welcome to the Forgotten Whispers. Welcome to tonight's journey through the mundane corridors of history. I'm your host, and tonight we're exploring one of Denmark's most overlooked archaeological puzzles. Find yourself a comfortable position, dim the lights, and prepare to drift away as we uncover the tedious details of a mystery that has plagued historians for decades. What lies beneath the ancient runestones of Jelling? When did the Vikings first discover the strange underground chambers? Where exactly did King Gorm the Old hide his most terrible secret? Who built the mysterious stone circles that predate even the oldest Viking settlements? How did an entire generation of Norse settlers simply vanish without a trace? Tonight, we begin our slow descent into the unremarkable yet puzzling story of Jelling, Denmark, where in 958 AD, something extraordinarily ordinary happened that would bore you to sleep while simultaneously haunting the edges of historical understanding. The year was 958 AD. The morning mist clung to the Danish countryside like a damp woolen blanket, heavy and suffocating. King Gorm the Old stood before the great burial mounds of Jelling, his weathered hands gripping a peculiar stone tablet that had been unearthed just days before. The inscription was in runes, but not any runes his scribes could decipher. They were older, stranger, carved with a precision that seemed almost mechanical, according to the monk Ansgar's chronicles, which historians largely ignore due to their tedious nature. Gorm had been having the same dream for 17 consecutive nights. In this dream, he walked through endless corridors carved from living rock, following the sound of dripping water that never seemed to grow closer. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt his eyes to look upon, and at the end of each corridor stood a door made of black stone. The excavation had begun as a simple expansion of the royal burial grounds. The workers, mostly thralls captured from raids in England, had been digging for 3 weeks when their shovels struck something that wasn't earth or stone. It was smooth, almost glass-like, and warm to the touch despite being buried beneath 6 feet of cold Danish soil. What they uncovered was a chamber, perfectly circular, carved with impossible precision from a single piece of granite. The walls were covered in the same strange runes that appeared on the tablet, arranged in spiraling patterns that seemed to move in peripheral vision. At the center of the chamber sat a wooden chair, simple and unremarkable, except for the fact that the wood showed no signs of decay, despite what carbon dating would later suggest was an age of over 2,000 years. The most unremarkable detail, the one that would put most listeners to sleep within minutes of hearing it, was the presence of exactly 347 small holes drilled into the chamber floor. Each hole was precisely 1 inch in diameter and exactly 2 inches deep. They were arranged in a pattern that mathematicians wouldn't be able to decode until the invention of advanced computational systems in the 20th century. King Gorm ordered his most trusted advisor, a man named Bjorn the unnecessarily verbose, to investigate the chamber. Bjorn was known throughout the kingdom for his ability to make even the most exciting discoveries sound monumentally boring. His reports were so tedious that they were often used as a cure for insomnia among the royal court. Bjorn's first report, preserved in the archives of the Danish National Museum, runs to 47 pages of meticulous description about the chambers, dimensions, the exact shade of grey of the granite walls, and detailed measurements of each individual hole in the floor. The report notes that the temperature in the chamber remained a constant, 47 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of the season above ground, and that sounds inside the chamber seemed to be absorbed by the walls, creating an effect of profound silence. that was described as deeply unsettling in its mundane completeness. The investigation took 17 days. On the first day, Bjorn noted that the chamber appeared to be empty except for the chair and the holes. On the second day, he observed that standing in the chamber for more than 10 minutes produced a slight headache and an overwhelming urge to count things. On the third day, he discovered that the runes on the walls were not actually carved into the stone, but somehow existed as part of the stone's natural structure, as if the granite had grown around them. By the seventh day, Bjorn had begun to notice patterns in the runes that corresponded to astronomical events. The spiraling arrangement seemed to track the movements of celestial bodies with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched by European astronomers for another 6 centuries. This discovery was noted in a single sentence buried in the middle of a 3-page description of the chamber's echo characteristics. The most significant discovery came on the 14th day, when Bjorn realized that the holes in the floor were not random, but formed a 3-dimensional map of the local underground cave system. When wooden pegs were placed in the holes according to their depths, they created a perfect scale model of caverns that wouldn't be discovered by modern spelunkers until 1847. King Gorm, upon reading Bjorn's reports, made a decision that would change the course of Danish history in the most unremarkable way possible. He ordered the chamber to be sealed and declared the entire area off-limits to everyone except his immediate family. The official reason given was that the site was being reserved for future royal burials, an explanation so mundane that no one questioned it. However, the monk Ansgar's chronicles suggest a different reason. According to his account, which historians dismiss as the fantastical ravings of a man who spent too much time alone with his manuscripts, Gorm had discovered something in Bjorn's reports that terrified him. The final report, which has never been found, allegedly contained a translation of some of the runes, revealing the true purpose of the chamber. The translation, if it existed, described the chamber as a listening post built by people who called themselves the Silent Builders. These were not Vikings, not Danes, not any known European tribe. They were described as tall, thin people with pale skin and dark eyes who spoke in whispers and built their structures during the hours between midnight and dawn. According to Ansgar's account, the Silent Builders had constructed dozens of these chambers throughout Scandinavia, all connected by underground tunnels that followed ley lines invisible to normal human perception. The chambers were designed to monitor something that the runes referred to only as the Deep Dreamers, entities that existed in the space between sleeping and waking, between life and death. The holes in the floor were not mapping tools but listening devices, each one tuned to a specific frequency that allowed the Silent Builders to eavesdrop on conversations that took place in dreams. The wooden chair was a focusing device, allowing a trained listener to hear the whispered secrets that people revealed in their sleep across vast distances. King Gorm, according to this account, had tested the chair himself. What he heard in those experimental sessions was never recorded, but Ansgar noted that the king aged visibly in the weeks following his discovery of the chamber. His hair turned completely grey, and he developed a habit of checking the locks on his bedroom door multiple times each night. The most disturbing entry in Ansgar's chronicle concerns a conversation the monk claimed to have overheard between Gorm and his son, Harald Bluetooth. According to Ansgar, Harald had asked his father why he seemed so frightened, and Gorm had replied, "Because now I know that they are still listening, and they have been listening for a very long time." As autumn turned to winter in 958 AD, strange things began happening in the villages surrounding Jelling. People reported unusually vivid dreams, often featuring the same recurring elements: long corridors carved from stone, the sound of dripping water, and doors that opened onto infinite darkness. Children began drawing pictures of symbols they claimed to have seen in their sleep, symbols that bore an uncomfortable resemblance to the runes found in the chamber. The local priest, Father Magnus, noted in his parish records that confessions during this period became increasingly bizarre. Villagers spoke of dreaming about people they had never met, conversations in languages they didn't understand, and the persistent feeling that someone was watching them even in their deepest sleep. Most remarkably, and most boringly, several villagers reported the same dream about finding small holes drilled into the floors of their homes. When they woke and checked, they found that the holes were actually there, perfectly circular, exactly 1 inch in diameter, and precisely 2 inches deep. As chapter 1 draws to its unremarkable close, we leave King Goem standing in his chambers, staring out at the sealed burial mounds, wondering if he has made the right decision in hiding what he discovered. The chamber remains sealed, its secrets buried beneath tons of earth and stone, waiting for the next chapter of our sleep-inducing journey through history's most tedious mysteries. The merchant's Mapother. Winter of 958 AD was unremarkable in most ways, characterized by the usual Danish combination of cold rain, muddy roads, and the persistent smell of wood smoke that clung to everything like a damp shroud. It was during this thoroughly mundane season that a traveling merchant named Eric the Forgettable arrived in Jelling with a cart full of ordinary goods and one extraordinary map. Eric was the sort of person whose presence barely registered in any room. He was neither tall nor short, neither handsome nor ugly, neither particularly clever nor noticeably stupid. He was, in every measurable way, perfectly average, which made him an ideal traveling merchant in an age when being memorable could be dangerous. His goods were equally unremarkable: wool blankets, iron tools, pottery, dried fish, and various herbs and spices that were common throughout Scandinavia. What made Eric interesting to exactly no one was his habit of keeping detailed records of every transaction, every road traveled, and every conversation overheard in the countless inns and marketplaces of his routes. These records, preserved in the archives of the Bergen Maritime Museum, consist of 17 leather-bound journals filled with Eric's meticulous handwriting. The entries are so tediously detailed that they have been used by several universities as examples of how not to write interesting historical accounts. Most historians who have attempted to study Eric's journals have abandoned the project within hours, defeated by the merchant's extraordinary ability to make even dramatic events sound as exciting as watching paint dry. However, buried within the mind-numbing details of wool prices and weather conditions, Eric's journals contain references to a map that he acquired during a trading expedition to the remote Orkney Islands in the summer of 957 AD. The map, according to his records, was drawn on a piece of vellum that felt strangely warm to the touch and never seemed to accumulate dust or dirt despite being carried in his pack for months. The man who sold Eric the map was described in typical Eric fashion: a person of indeterminate age, approximately average height, with the kind of face that you forget while still looking at it. The transaction took place in a tavern whose name Eric failed to record, in exchange for 3 wool blankets of middling quality and a quantity of salted herrings sufficient to fill a small barrel. What made the map remarkable, though Eric seemed incapable of recognizing its significance, was its accuracy. It showed the coastlines of Scotland, Norway, and Denmark, with a precision that wouldn't be matched by European cartographers for another 3 centuries. More importantly, it included detailed drawings of underground chambers and tunnel systems that, according to modern archaeological surveys, correspond exactly to sites that weren't discovered until the 19th and 20th centuries. The map included the chamber that King Gorm had discovered beneath Jelling, along with 17 other similar sites throughout Scandinavia. Each site was marked with the same symbol, a spiral within a circle, drawn with such precision that they appeared to have been created with modern drafting tools. Eric, in his thoroughly unremarkable way, had attempted to visit several of the sites marked on the map during his trading routes. His journal entries about these visits are masterpieces of boring observation, focusing primarily on the practical difficulties of traveling to remote locations and the disappointing lack of trading opportunities in sparsely populated areas. At a site in northern Norway, Eric found a depression in the ground, circular in shape, approximately 30 feet in diameter, filled with stones that appeared to have been placed with some deliberation. His investigation of the site, described in exhaustive detail over 4 pages, revealed that the stones formed a spiral pattern when viewed from above, and that the center of the spiral was marked by a single black stone that was warm to the touch even in the middle of winter. Eric's attempts to move the central stone revealed that it was not actually resting on the ground, but was somehow suspended exactly 1 inch above the earth. His journal notes that he could pass a stick completely under the stone, but that the stone never moved or showed any signs of being supported by anything visible. The most unremarkable aspect of Eric's discovery, which he recorded with his typical attention to tedious detail, was that standing within the stone circle produced a barely perceptible humming sound. The sound was so faint that Eric initially attributed it to wind moving through the surrounding trees. But further investigation revealed that the humming continued even on perfectly still days. Eric's journal includes a crude drawing of the stone circle, along with measurements of each individual stone. Modern analysis of these measurements has revealed that the stones were placed according to precise mathematical relationships that wouldn't be understood by European scholars until the development of advanced geometry in the Renaissance period. At another site, located on a remote island off the coast of Sweden, Eric discovered what he described as a structure of unknown purpose, built from stones too large to have been moved by conventional means. The structure, according to his measurements, was a perfect octagon with walls that rose exactly 21 feet above the surrounding ground. The interior of the octagonal building was completely empty except for a circular opening in the center of the floor. Eric lowered a rope into the opening and determined that it descended at least 50 feet before reaching what felt like water. The water, when he hauled up a sample using a bucket attached to his rope, was perfectly clear and had no taste, but remained liquid even when the temperature dropped well below freezing. Most intriguingly, and most boringly, Eric noted that sounds made inside the octagonal building produced echoes that seemed to come from underground rather than from the walls or ceiling. When he shouted, the echo came from below, filtered up through the central opening with a hollow, distant quality that suggested vast underground spaces. Eric's map led him to 12 different sites over the course of 18 months. At each location, he found evidence of ancient construction that predated known Viking settlements by centuries. The constructions all shared certain characteristics: precise geometric shapes, the use of stones too large to be moved by available technology, and acoustic properties that suggested connections to underground chambers or tunnel systems. The map also included notations in a script that Eric couldn't read, written in a dark ink that seemed to shift and change when viewed in different light conditions. Modern linguistic analysis of Eric's careful copies of these notations has identified elements that appear to be related to Proto-Germanic languages, but with grammatical structures that don't match any known European linguistic tradition. When Eric finally arrived in Jelling in the winter of 958 AD, he was carrying more than just ordinary trade goods. His journals revealed that he had become increasingly obsessed with the map and the sights it showed, though he characteristically failed to recognize the significance of his obsession. He wrote extensively about his growing difficulty sleeping, his tendency to dream about underground chambers, and his compulsive need to draw spiral patterns in the margins of his journal pages. Eric's arrival in Jelling coincided with a period of unusual activity around the sealed burial mounds. Local villagers reported seeing lights moving beneath the ground at night, and several people claimed to hear voices, speaking in unknown languages, coming from the direction of the royal burial grounds. According to parish records kept by Father Magnus, Eric visited the church shortly after his arrival and requested permission to examine the foundations. His stated reason was a professional interest in stone construction techniques, but Father Magnus noted that Eric seemed particularly interested in determining whether the church's foundations extended into underground chambers. Eric's examination of the church revealed that the building had been constructed on top of much older foundations, made from the same type of precisely cut stone found at the other sites on his map. More significantly, he discovered that the church's basement contained a sealed doorway that corresponded exactly to the location marked on his map as the entrance to the underground tunnel system that connected all the ancient sites. The doorway was hidden behind a false wall that had been constructed so skillfully that it was virtually invisible unless viewed from precisely the right angle. Eric's journal describes the wall as being made from stones that fit together so perfectly that not even a knife blade could be inserted between them, and that produced a faint humming sound when touched. Eric never recorded what he found behind the false wall, if anything. His final journal entry, dated 3 days after his discovery of the hidden doorway, consists of a single sentence repeated 127 times. The listeners are always listening, and the dreamers never wake. Eric, the forgettable, disappeared from Jelling. Sometime during the night of December 15th, 958 AD, his cart, horses, and trade goods were found the next morning, arranged in a perfect circle around the church. The arrangement was so precise that it appeared to have been measured with surveying equipment. Though no such equipment existed in Denmark at that time, the map was never found. The scribe's burdened brother, Adalbert, was not a remarkable man by any standard of measurement available in 10th century Denmark. He was neither particularly tall nor notably short, possessed of a forgettable face and a voice that seemed designed to fade into the background of any conversation. His handwriting was neat but not beautiful, his Latin was correct but not elegant, and his theological insights were sound but not profound. In every measurable way, Brother Adalbert was exactly the sort of person who could spend an entire lifetime without anyone bothering to remember his name. This fundamental unremarkableness made him perfectly suited for his position as the monastery's copying scribe, a job that required infinite patience, absolute attention to tedious detail, and the ability to remain focused on mind-numbingly repetitive tasks for hours at a time. Brother Adalbert could copy the same prayer 50 times without varying so much as a single letter, and could illuminate manuscript margins with decorative patterns, so consistent that they appeared to have been produced by some sort of mechanical devised at the monastery of St. Bartholomew, located approximately 7 miles southeast of Jelling, was itself an unremarkable institution, founded in 934 AD by a group of monks whose names have been lost to history. It served primarily as a waste for religious travelers and a center for the tedious but necessary work of copying manuscripts. The monastery's library contained exactly 247 books, most of them dealing with agricultural techniques, basic theology, and various administrative procedures that were essential for the functioning of medieval religious communities. Brother Adalbert had been performing his copying duties for 11 years when he encountered the manuscript that would transform his unremarkable existence into something approaching significance, though the transformation would prove to be neither pleasant nor particularly beneficial to his long-term well-being. The manuscript arrived at the monastery in January of 959 AD, carried by a traveling monk who gave his name as Brother Ignatius, but whose credentials were never properly verified. Brother Ignatius claimed to be traveling from a monastery in Ireland, though his accent suggested origins considerably further north, and his knowledge of Irish monastic practices was remarkably vague for someone who claimed to have spent 15 years studying Celtic Christianity. The manuscript itself was bound in leather that felt strangely warm to the touch and never seemed to accumulate the dust that settled on everything else in the monastery's library. The text was written in Latin, but in a dialect that Brother Adalbert found increasingly difficult to understand as he progressed through the copying process. The vocabulary was correct, and the grammar followed established rules, but the meaning of many sentences seemed to shift depending on the time of day when they were read. Brother Adalbert began copying the manuscript on the feast day of Saint Sebastian, working in the monastery scriptorium during the prescribed hours between prime and sext. His initial impression was that the text was some sort of historical chronicle, dealing with the settlement of Scandinavia by various Germanic tribes during the migration period. The opening chapters contained detailed descriptions of early agricultural techniques, trade relationships, and the gradual conversion of pagan populations to Christianity. However, as Brother Adalbert progressed through the manuscript, the content began to shift in ways that he found increasingly disturbing, though he characteristically failed to recognize the significance of his growing unease. The historical chronicle gradually incorporated elements that seemed to have no basis in accepted Christian doctrine or known historical fact. The manuscript described a group of people called the Silent Builders, who had arrived in Scandinavia centuries before the Germanic migrations. According to the text, these people were not entirely human, though they appeared human in most respects. They were described as being unusually tall and thin, with pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in darkness and eyes that were completely black from edge to edge. The Silent Builders, according to the manuscript, had constructed a network of underground facilities throughout Scandinavia for the purpose of monitoring what the text referred to as the Deep Dreamers. These entities were described as beings that existed primarily in the realm of human sleep, feeding on the psychic energy generated by dreaming minds and using that energy to maintain their existence in a state somewhere between life and death. Brother Adalbert copied these descriptions with his characteristic attention to detail, never pausing to consider whether the content was appropriate for a Christian monastery's library. His journal, preserved in the Danish National Archives, reveals that he was experiencing increasingly vivid dreams during the period when he was working on the manuscript, but he attributed these dreams to the natural result of spending long hours concentrating on unfamiliar text. The dreams according to Brother Adalbert's journal, consistently featured the same elements: long corridors carved from stone, the sound of dripping water that never seemed to grow closer or further away, and doors made from black stone that stood slightly ajar but could never be opened wider, no matter how much force was applied. In these dreams, Brother Adalbert found himself walking through the corridors, following the sound of voices that spoke in languages he didn't recognize but somehow understood. The most disturbing aspect of these dreams, which Brother Adalbert recorded with typical attention to mundane detail, was the presence of other people in the corridors. These dream figures appeared to be ordinary humans, but they moved with a strange, synchronized precision that suggested they were not acting. According to their own will, they would walk in single file through the corridors, never speaking, never acknowledging Brother Adalbert's presence, always heading toward the doors that could never be fully opened. As Brother Adalbert continued copying the manuscript, his dreams began to include increasingly specific details about the underground network described in the text. He found himself walking through chambers that matched exactly the descriptions he had copied earlier that day, complete with the precise measurements and architectural details that the manuscript provided. More significantly, Brother Adalbert began to dream about chambers that were not described in the manuscript until weeks later. His dream experiences of these facilities were so detailed and accurate that when he finally encountered their descriptions in the text, he felt as though he was copying his own dream journal rather than translating an ancient chronicle. The manuscript's description of the deep dreamers became increasingly detailed as Brother Adalbert progressed through the copying process. According to the text, these entities had existed since the earliest days of human civilization, feeding on the psychic energy generated by sleeping minds. They were described as having no physical form in the conventional sense, but as being able to influence physical reality through their connections to dreaming humans. The deep dreamers, according to the manuscript, could implant thoughts, memories, and compulsions in sleeping minds, creating a form of psychological influence that was virtually undetectable to conscious awareness. They used this ability to guide human behavior in ways that served their own mysterious purposes, orchestrating historical events and cultural developments across centuries through the careful manipulation of individual dreams. The silent builders had constructed their underground network as a defense against the deep dreamers, creating facilities that could monitor and, to some extent, control the entity's influence on human consciousness. The chambers were equipped with what the manuscript described as listening devices that could detect the psychic emanations generated by dreaming minds and identify when those minds were being influenced by external forces. Brother Adalbert's copying of these descriptions coincided with a period of unusual activity in the monastery. Several monks reported experiencing vivid dreams featuring underground chambers and stone corridors. Others complained of difficulty sleeping, persistent headaches, and the feeling that they were being watched even when alone in their cells. Father Abbot Cornelius, the monastery's leader, noted in his private journal that the community's prayer schedule was being disrupted by monks who claimed to be receiving divine visions during their sleep. These visions, according to the monks' reports, consistently featured messages about the need to excavate beneath the monastery's foundations and to search for hidden chambers that contained important religious artifacts. The most significant incident occurred on the feast day of St. Bartholomew, when Brother Adalbert was discovered in the scriptorium at 3 o'clock in the morning, copying text from the manuscript despite the fact that there was no artificial light in the room and the moon was completely obscured by clouds. When questioned by Father Abbot Cornelius, Brother Adalbert claimed to have been copying by memory, working from mental images of text that he had studied earlier in the day. Examination of Brother Adalbert's work from that night revealed that he had copied 17 pages of text with perfect accuracy, including complex diagrams and marginal notations that would have been impossible to reproduce from memory. More disturbing was the discovery that the text Brother Adalbert had copied described events that were happening in the monastery at the exact time he was writing, including conversations between monks in distant parts of the building and activities that were taking place in complete darkness. Father Abbot Cornelius ordered Brother Adalbert to suspend his work on the manuscript until the community could determine whether the text was appropriate for Christian study. However, Brother Adalbert's journal reveals that he continued working on the manuscript in secret, copying portions of the text during the night hours when the rest of the community was asleep. The final entries in Brother Adalbert's journal, dated in March of 959 AD, consist primarily of increasingly frantic notes about his need to complete the copying process. He wrote about feeling compelled to finish the manuscript, as though the act of copying was somehow necessary for his continued existence. He described experiencing physical pain when he was away from the text for more than a few hours, and an overwhelming sense of incompleteness that could only be relieved by returning to his copying work. Brother Adalbert's final journal entry, written in handwriting that becomes increasingly erratic as the entry progresses, describes his realization that the manuscript was not simply a historical chronicle but some sort of instruction manual. The text, according to his final notes, contained detailed procedures for establishing contact with the deep dreamers and for accessing the underground network that the silent builders had constructed. Brother Adalbert disappeared from the monastery on the night of March 15th, 959 AD. His cell was found to contain no personal possessions except for his completed copy of the manuscript and a collection of drawings that showed detailed floor plans of underground chambers. The drawings matched perfectly with archaeological surveys of sites that wouldn't be discovered for another 8 centuries. The original manuscript was never found. The fisherman's catch Bjorn Eriksson was a fisherman of such complete ordinariness that his own neighbors frequently forgot his name, referring to him simply as the one with the boat or that fellow who smells like herring. He lived in a small cottage on the shore of Lake Tish, approximately 12 miles southwest of Jelling, where he maintained a routine so unvarying that the local villagers could set their sundials by his daily activities. Every morning, precisely 1 hour before dawn, Bjorn would launch his small fishing boat from the same spot on the lakeshore. He would row to the same fishing grounds, cast his nets in the same pattern, and return to shore at exactly the same time each day. His catch was invariably adequate, but never exceptional, consisting primarily of pike, perch, and various smaller fish that he sold at the weekly market in the village of Antvorskov. Bjorn's existence was so thoroughly predictable that when he failed to return from his fishing expedition on the morning of April 3rd, 959 AD, the entire village knew immediately that something was wrong. His boat was found 3 days later, drifting empty in the middle of the lake, with his nets still deployed but containing no fish. More puzzling was the discovery that Bjorn's nets had been arranged in a perfect spiral pattern, something that would have required considerable time and effort to accomplish deliberately. The mystery of Bjorn's disappearance might have remained just another unsolved puzzle in the unremarkable history of medieval Denmark, if not for the discovery of his fishing journal. The journal, found hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his cottage, contained detailed records of his daily catches dating back 7 years. The entries were written in Bjorn's characteristically methodical style, with precise notes about weather, conditions, water temperature, and the exact location of each successful fishing expedition. However, the final months of Bjorn's journal contained entries that differed significantly from his earlier records. Beginning in January of 959 AD, Bjorn had begun to note unusual phenomena in the lake that had apparently escaped the attention of other local fishermen. His descriptions of these phenomena were recorded with the same tedious attention to detail that characterized all of his writing, making them remarkably easy to ignore despite their increasingly bizarre content. On January 15th, Bjorn noted that his nets had been catching objects that were not fish. These objects, which he described as stones of unusual warmth and perfect roundness, were found tangled in his nets alongside his normal catch. Bjorn's measurements of these stones revealed that they were all exactly the same size, 3 inches in diameter, perfectly spherical, and warm to the touch despite having been pulled from the cold lake water. The stones had other unusual properties that Bjorn recorded with his typical matter-of-fact precision. They never became wet, despite being submerged in lake water for hours at a time. They produced a faint humming sound when placed near each other, with the intensity of the humming increasing proportionally to the number of stones in proximity. Most remarkably, the stones seemed to be growing warmer over time, with Bjorn noting a steady increase in temperature from day to day. By February, Bjorn was finding an average of 12 stones per day in his nets. His journal describes his attempts to determine the source of the stones, including several expeditions to map the lake bottom using a weighted rope. These surveys revealed that the stones were emerging from a circular depression in the lake floor, approximately 50 feet from the shoreline in water that was normally too shallow to contain large fish. Bjorn's mapping of the depression revealed that it was perfectly circular, with a diameter of exactly 30 feet and sides that dropped vertically for at least 40 feet before disappearing into darkness that his weighted rope could not penetrate. The walls of the depression appeared to be carved from solid stone, with a smooth surface that felt warm to the touch even when accessed through the cold lake water. Most intriguingly, Bjorn discovered that the depression was producing a steady current of warm water that rose from its depths and created a circular area on the lake surface where the water never froze. Even during the coldest winter weather, fish were attracted to this warm area, which explained why Bjorn's fishing grounds had always been more productive than other areas of the lake. In March, Bjorn began to record strange dreams that he attributed to spending too much time thinking about the mysterious depression. These dreams, described in his characteristically boring style, featured underground chambers filled with the same warm stones that he had been finding in his nets. In the dreams, Bjorn found himself walking through corridors lined with the stones, following passages that led deeper and deeper underground. The dream chambers were inhabited by tall, thin people who wore robes made from a material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflecting it. These people never spoke, but they would gesture for Bjorn to follow them through increasingly complex passages that eventually led to vast underground lakes filled with water that glowed with a faint, phosphorescent light. Bjorn's journal reveals that these dreams became increasingly detailed and consistent over time. He began to dream about specific architectural features of the underground chambers, including precise measurements of corridor widths, ceiling heights, and the spacing of the glowing stones that provided illumination. These measurements were recorded in his journal with the same methodical precision that he applied to his fishing records. More significantly, Bjorn began to dream about other people who were also exploring the underground chambers. These dream features appeared to be individuals from various time periods and locations, all of whom had somehow gained access to the same underground network. Bjorn described meeting a Roman soldier, a medieval monk, a Viking trader, and various other historical figures, all of whom were wandering through the stone corridors with the same confused expression that Bjorn imagined he wore in his own dreams. The Roman soldier, according to Bjorn's dream records, claimed to have entered the underground network through a well in a villa near Pompeii, shortly before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. The medieval monk spoke of finding a hidden entrance beneath his monastery, while the Viking trader described discovering a stone door hidden behind a waterfall in the Norwegian fjords. What connected all of these dream figures was their shared experience of being drawn to the underground network by the discovery of the warm stones. Each had found the stones in different contexts in fishing nets, buried in gardens, hidden in ancient ruins, but all described the same properties that Bjorn had observed: perfect spherical shape, constant warmth, and the tendency to produce harmonic frequencies when placed in proximity to each other. Bjorn's final journal entries describe his growing realization that the dreams were not simply products of his imagination, but were somehow connected to actual experiences of real people who had encountered the underground network at different points in history. He wrote about his ability to continue conversations with dream figures from one night to the next, and about his growing knowledge of passages and chambers that he had never personally explored in his dreams. The most disturbing entry in Bjorn's journal, dated March 30th, 959 AD, describes his discovery that the warm stones could be used to enhance and direct the dream experiences. By holding one of the stones while falling asleep, Bjorn found that he could control his movement through the underground network and could access chambers and passages that had previously been beyond his reach in dreams. Using this technique, Bjorn explored areas of the underground network that were apparently much older than the chambers he had initially encountered. These deeper levels contained architecture that was more complex and sophisticated, with walls covered in symbols that seemed to move and change when viewed directly. The passages in these deeper areas led to chambers that contained what Bjorn described as machines made of stone and light that served purposes beyond understanding. Most remarkably, Bjorn's enhanced dream exploration revealed that the underground network was not limited to Scandinavia, but extended throughout the world, connecting sites on every continent through a system of tunnels that ignored conventional geographic limitations. The network included chambers beneath famous historical sites, hidden entrances in major cities, and access points in remote wilderness areas that had never been explored by surface dwellers. Bjorn's final journal entry, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, describes his plan to use his enhanced dreaming ability to physically locate one of the network entrances near Lake Tish. He had identified a specific chamber in his dreams that appeared to be directly beneath the mysterious depression in the lake floor, and he believed that by diving to the bottom of the depression, he could find a physical entrance to the underground network. The entry concludes with Bjorn's observation that the warm stones had been appearing in his nets with increasing frequency, and that their temperature had risen to the point where they were almost too hot to handle safely. He wrote about his growing compulsion to dive into the depression, describing the feeling as a pull that grows stronger each day, like the tide calling to the moon. Bjorn's boat was found with his nets arranged in the same spiral pattern that appeared in his dreams. suggesting that his final fishing expedition had been guided by knowledge acquired during his enhanced dream experiences. The warm stones were never found, despite extensive searches of the lake bottom by local divers who reported that the mysterious depression had disappeared, leaving only normal lake bed where the perfectly circular opening had been. The chroniclers. Discovery in the autumn of 959 AD. A travelling chronicler named Aldrich, the methodical, arrived in Jelling with the express purpose of documenting what he believed to be a straightforward historical curiosity, the recently completed runestones commissioned by King Harold Bluetooth to commemorate his father. Gorm, the old Aldrich, was a man whose entire existence revolved around the meticulous documentation of historical events. No matter how insignificant they might appear to others, Aldrich's approach to historical documentation was so thoroughly systematic that his chronicles were widely regarded as definitive sources, despite being almost impossibly boring to read. He would spend weeks in each location, interviewing every available witness, measuring every relevant structure, and recording every detail that might possibly be of historical significance. His completed chronicles were masterpieces of comprehensiveness and tedium, containing information that was absolutely accurate but presented in a manner that could cure insomnia in the most alert reader. What Aldrich discovered in Jelling, however, would challenge his methodical approach to history and introduce elements that could not be easily categorized or explained through conventional documentary techniques. His investigation, which was intended to take no more than 2 weeks, would extend over 4 months and result in a chronicle that was deemed so disturbing by subsequent historians that most copies were quietly removed from monastery libraries and allowed to deteriorate into illegibility. Aldrich's initial interviews with local residents revealed a consistent pattern of unusual occurrences that had begun shortly after the sealing of the ancient chamber discovered beneath the royal burial grounds. Villagers reported dreams that featured recurring architectural elements, stone corridors, circular chambers, and doors that opened onto infinite darkness. More significantly, multiple witnesses described dreaming about the same specific individuals, people they had never met in waking life but who appeared repeatedly in their sleep experiences. These shared dream figures were described with remarkable consistency across different witnesses. The most frequently mentioned was a tall woman with completely white hair who wore robes that seemed to be made from some sort of metallic fabric. This figure, whom witnesses referred to as the guide, would appear in dreams to lead people through underground passages toward destinations that were never quite reached before the dreamer awakened. Another recurring figure was described as a man of indeterminate age who carried a staff topped with a sphere that glowed with cold light. This figure, known to dreamers as the Keeper, appeared to be responsible for maintaining various mechanical devices that were scattered throughout the underground network. Witnesses described watching the Keeper perform incomprehensible maintenance, procedures on stone machinery that produced sounds like distant thunder. Aldrich's documentation of these shared dream experiences revealed that they were not random, but followed specific patterns that corresponded to lunar cycles and seasonal changes. Dreams featuring the guide were most common during the new moon, while encounters with the Keeper occurred primarily during the full moon. Other recurring figures appeared according to schedules that Aldrich was able to map with mathematical precision. Most remarkably, Aldrich discovered that the shared dreams were not limited to residents of Jelling, but were being experienced by people throughout Denmark and southern Sweden. His expanded investigation, which involved correspondence with chroniclers in other regions, revealed that identical dream figures were appearing to people across Scandinavia, always in the context of underground chambers and stone corridors. The consistency of these reports led Aldrich to hypothesize that the dreams were not psychological phenomena, but were somehow connected to actual places and people that existed in physical reality. His investigation into the historical basis for the dream figures led him to examine monastery archives and royal records dating back several centuries, searching for any mention of individuals who matched the descriptions provided by contemporary witnesses. This archival research revealed references to people matching the dream figures, descriptions in documents dating from the early 8th century through the mid-10th century. The references appeared in various contexts as mysterious visitors to monasteries, as advisors to minor kings, as traders who appeared at markets for brief periods before disappearing without explanation. In every case, the individuals were described as arriving without fanfare and departing without warning, leaving behind only vague memories and the impression that they had been somehow significant despite their unremarkable interactions. More intriguingly, Aldrich discovered that several of the historical references included mentions of underground chambers and stone passages in contexts that suggested actual physical locations rather than symbolic or metaphorical descriptions. A monastery chronicle from 847 AD described the discovery of chambers carved from living stone beneath the foundation of a church in southern Sweden. A royal document from 892 AD referenced payments made to workers who were employed to seal passages that led to places best left unexplored. Aldrich's most significant discovery came when he gained access to the sealed royal archives that contained King Gom's private papers. These documents, which had been classified as too sensitive for public examination, included detailed reports about the chamber that had been discovered beneath the Jelling burial grounds, along with transcripts of interviews with the workers who had participated in the excavation. The reports revealed that the chamber had contained more than just the wooden chair and the pattern of holes that had been documented in the official accounts. The workers had also discovered a collection of stone tablets covered with inscriptions in an unknown script, along with several mechanical devices that appeared to be made from materials that were not available in 10th century Denmark. Most significantly, the reports described the discovery of a passage that led from the chamber deeper underground, extending in the direction of Lake Tish. The passage was large enough for a person to walk through comfortably, and showed signs of recent use despite being sealed beneath tons of earth for what appeared to be centuries. King Goan had ordered a small expedition to explore the passage, consisting of 3 volunteers led by a royal guard named Olaf the Cautious. The expedition had been equipped with torches, rope, and provisions for 3 days of underground travel. They had been instructed to map the passage, document any significant discoveries, and return within 72 hours, regardless of what they found. The expedition had returned after 56 hours, but only 2 of the 3 volunteers had emerged from the passage. Olaf the Cautious was never seen again, and the 2 surviving members of the expedition had provided reports that were so disturbing that King Gorm had ordered the passage to be sealed immediately and had forbidden any further exploration of the underground network. According to the surviving expedition members, the passage had led to a vast underground complex that extended far beyond the boundaries of the royal burial grounds. The complex consisted of dozens of chambers, connected by corridors that followed precise geometric patterns, all carved from solid stone with a precision that seemed impossible given available construction techniques the chambers had contained. various artifacts that appeared to be much older than any known Scandinavian civilization. These artifacts included stone tablets covered with astronomical calculations that were accurate to a degree that wouldn't be matched by European astronomers for several centuries. Mechanical devices that appeared to be powered by some unknown energy source, and collections of perfectly spherical stones that were warm to the touch and produced harmonic frequencies when placed in proximity to each other. Most disturbing was the expedition's discovery that the underground complex was inhabited. The inhabitants were described as tall, thin people who wore robes made from a metallic fabric, and who moved with a synchronized precision that suggested they were not acting according to individual will. These people had not appeared hostile, but they had observed the expedition with an intensity that the survivors found deeply unsettling. The inhabitants had communicated with the expedition through a form of telepathic projection that allowed them to place thoughts and images directly into the explorers' minds. Through this communication, the expedition had learned that the underground complex was part of a vast network that extended throughout the world, connecting similar facilities on every continent through a system of passages that ignored conventional geographic limitations. The network had been constructed by a civilization that the inhabitants referred to as the Silent Builders, people who had existed on Earth long before the development of known human cultures. The Silent Builders had created the network as a monitoring system, designed to observe and, when necessary, influence the development of surface civilizations through the careful manipulation of individual dreams and subconscious thoughts. The expedition had been allowed to explore several chambers of the complex before being politely but firmly escorted back to the passage entrance. However, during their exploration, they had encountered Olaf, the Cautious, who had apparently chosen to remain in the underground complex rather than return to the surface. Olaf had appeared to be unharmed, but had communicated through the same telepathic projection system used by the inhabitants, suggesting that he had somehow been integrated into their community. Aldrich's chronicle of these discoveries was completed in January of 960 AD, but was never widely distributed due to concerns about its potential impact on public order and religious orthodoxy. The few copies that were made were kept in monastery archives under strict restrictions, and most were eventually lost or deliberately destroyed due to their disturbing content. Aldrich himself disappeared shortly after completing his chronicle, leaving behind only a brief note stating that he had decided to conduct additional research that would require extended travel to remote locations. His personal effects were found arranged in a perfect circle in his lodgings, with his completed chronicle placed at the center of the arrangement, alongside a collection of perfectly spherical stones that were warm to the touch and produced harmonic frequencies when placed in proximity to each other. The merchants returned the spring of 960 AD, brought with it the kind of unremarkable weather that Danish farmers had learned to expect, alternating periods of cold rain and brief, tepid sunshine. That produced muddy fields and the persistent smell of wet earth that clung to everything like a damp blanket. It was during this thoroughly ordinary season that Eric the Forgettable returned to Jelling, arriving as unexpectedly as he had departed and bringing with him stories that were so thoroughly mundane in their telling that they almost disguised their extraordinary content. Eric's reappearance was first noted by the innkeeper's wife, who observed that the same unremarkable man who had disappeared 4 months earlier was now sitting at the same corner table, eating the same meal of bread and herring, and displaying the same tendency to blend into the background until he became almost invisible to casual observation. The only noticeable difference was that Eric now carried a leather satchel that seemed to be considerably heavier than his previous possessions, and that he had developed a habit of checking the locks on his room door multiple times before retiring. Each night, Eric's explanation for his absence was characteristically boring. He claimed to have extended his trading route to include several remote settlements in northern Sweden, where he had discovered opportunities to acquire amber and furs at prices that justified the additional travel time. His account of this expedition, delivered in his typically methodical style, included detailed descriptions of road conditions, weather patterns, and the relative merits of various inns where he had stayed during his travels. However, careful examination of Eric's trade goods revealed items that were not consistent with his claimed itinerary. His amber specimens included varieties that were not found in Swedish deposits, and several pieces contained inclusions of insects that belonged to species that had been extinct for thousands of years. His furs were of exceptional quality, but came from animals that were not native to Scandinavia, and showed signs of preparation techniques that were not used by known European furriers. More intriguingly, Eric's satchel contained a collection of stone tablets covered with inscriptions in the same unknown script that had been found in the sealed chamber beneath the royal burial grounds. The tablets were made from a type of stone that geological surveys would later identify as originating from quarries in regions that had not been accessible to 10th century traders, and the inscriptions had been carved with a precision that suggested the use of tools that were not available in medieval Europe. Eric's journal, which he continued to maintain with his characteristic attention to tedious detail, revealed that his travels had taken him to locations that were not included in his public account of his trading expedition. The journal entries described visits to underground chambers that were accessed through hidden entrances in various remote locations throughout Scandinavia, and documented his interactions with people who did not appear to be entirely human despite their generally human appearance. According to his journal, Eric had discovered the first of these underground entrances while seeking shelter from a storm in the mountains of northern Sweden. The entrance had been concealed behind a waterfall, hidden so effectively that it was only visible when viewed from a specific angle during particular lighting conditions. The passage beyond the entrance had led to a chamber that matched exactly the descriptions provided by the survivors of King Gom's underground expedition. The chamber had been inhabited by the same tall, thin people who wore metallic robes and communicated through telepathic projection. These inhabitants, whom Eric's journal referred to as the custodians, had welcomed him with what appeared to be polite interest and had provided him with a guided tour of their underground facility. The tour had revealed that the chamber was part of a vast complex that extended far beneath the Swedish mountains, connected to similar facilities throughout the world through a network of passages that seemed to ignore conventional geographic limitations. The custodians had explained through their telepathic communication system that they were the descendants of the Silent Builders, an ancient civilization that had constructed the network as a monitoring and control system for surface civilizations. The custodians had shown Eric chambers that contained what they described as listening devices, capable of monitoring human thoughts and dreams across vast distances. These devices appeared to be made from the same type of stone as the tablets. In Eric's satchel, arranged in complex geometric patterns that produced barely audible harmonic frequencies when activated. Other chambers contained what the custodians called influence projectors, devices that could broadcast thoughts and images directly into the minds of sleeping humans. These projectors were apparently used to guide the development of surface civilizations by implanting ideas, memories, and compulsions that would influence individual behavior in ways that served the custodian's long-term objectives. Eric's journal described his growing realization that many of the major developments in human history had been influenced by the custodian's dream manipulation techniques. Religious revelations, scientific discoveries, and political movements had all been guided by carefully placed thoughts and images that appeared to their recipients as divine inspiration or natural insight. The custodians had allowed Eric to observe the operation of their monitoring and influence systems, apparently viewing him as a harmless curiosity whose documentation of their activities would never be taken seriously by surface dwellers. They had shown him chambers where teams of custodians worked around the clock, monitoring the dreams of thousands of humans and coordinating the broadcast of influence projections that would guide behavior in subtle but significant ways. Most remarkably, the custodians had provided Eric with access to their historical records, stone tablets that documented their activities over thousands of years of human civilization. These records revealed that the custodians had been responsible for guiding the development of agriculture, the establishment of early cities, the creation of writing systems, and the spread of various religious and philosophical movements. The records also documented the custodians' ongoing conflict with entities they referred to as the Deep Dreamers, beings that existed primarily in the realm of human sleep and fed on the psychic energy generated by dreaming minds. The Deep Dreamers had apparently been attempting to gain greater influence over human consciousness, using their feeding activities to implant their own thoughts and compulsions in sleeping minds. The underground network had been constructed as a defense against the Deep Dreamers, creating a system that could monitor their activities and counteract their influence through the broadcast of competing thoughts and images. The ongoing struggle between the custodians and the Deep Dreamers had been playing out in the dreams of humans for millennia, with most people remaining completely unaware that their sleep experiences were being influenced by external forces. Eric's journal revealed that the custodians had recruited him as an agent for their surface operations, providing him with stone tablets that contained encoded messages and instructions for other custodian agents operating in various European cities. His trading activities were to serve as a cover for these communications, allowing him to travel freely between locations while carrying out his covert assignments. The stone tablets in Eric's satchel were apparently communication devices that could transmit messages through the underground network, allowing the custodians to coordinate their activities across vast distances without relying on conventional methods of communication. The tablets were activated by placing them in specific geometric arrangements, which would establish connections to corresponding devices in other locations. Eric's final journal entries, written during his stay in Jelling, described his growing awareness of the extent of the custodian's influence on daily life in medieval Denmark. He had begun to recognize patterns in local events that suggested custodian intervention, dreams that led to specific behavioral changes, coincidences that seemed too convenient to be natural, and the gradual spread of ideas that appeared to have no obvious source. Most significantly, Eric had realized that the unusual phenomena occurring in Jelling were the result of a breakdown in the normal functioning of the underground network, the discovery and sealing of the chamber beneath. The royal burial grounds had apparently disrupted the custodians' monitoring and influence systems, creating a situation where dreams were becoming more vivid and shared experiences were occurring with greater frequency. The custodians were apparently concerned that this disruption could attract the attention of the Deep Dreamers, potentially allowing these entities to establish a stronger presence in the Jelling area. Eric's mission was to monitor the situation and report any signs of deep dreamer activity, while also working to restore normal functioning to the compromised section of the network. Eric's journal concluded with his observation that the restoration process would require the reopening of the sealed chamber and the reactivation of the devices it contained. However, he noted that such action would need to be taken carefully, as improper reactivation could result in even greater disruption to the network and potentially catastrophic consequences for the local population. Eric the Forgettable disappeared from Jelling for the second time on the night of May 15th, 960 AD. His room was found to contain only his completed journal and a collection of stone tablets arranged in a complex geometric pattern. The arrangement was so precise that it appeared to have been measured with advanced surveying equipment, and the tablets produced a barely audible harmonic frequency that continued for several hours after Eric's departure. The Children's Games. Summer of 960 AD was distinguished by weather so perfectly ordinary that it seemed almost deliberately designed to avoid attracting attention. The temperature remained within the expected range for Danish summers. The rainfall occurred at predictable intervals, and the crops grew with the kind of steady, unremarkable progress that suggested nature was functioning according to its most boring possible schedule. It was against this backdrop of complete meteorological normalcy that the children of Jelling began to play a new game that was so simple and monotonous that adults paid no attention to it whatsoever. The game, which the children called following. The paths consisted of walking in single file through the village and surrounding countryside, following routes that seemed to have no particular destination or purpose. The children would begin these processions at various times throughout the day, gathering spontaneously without any apparent coordination or leadership. They would walk silently, maintaining precise spacing between individuals, and would continue their processions for periods ranging from 30 minutes to several hours. What made the game noteworthy, though no adult initially recognized its significance, was the mathematical precision of the routes the children followed. Their processions traced geometric patterns across the landscape with an accuracy that would have impressed professional surveyors, creating designs that were only visible when viewed from elevated positions or when mapped over extended periods. Of observation, the village priest, Father Magnus, was the first adult to notice the unusual nature of the children's game. Though his initial interest was motivated by concerns about proper Christian behavior, rather than by any recognition of the game's more mysterious aspects, Father Magnus had observed that the children's processions often began and ended at locations that had religious significance, including the village church, various roadside shrines, and the sealed burial mounds of the royal cemetery. Father Magnus's investigation of the children's activities revealed that they were following routes that corresponded to underground features that were not visible from the surface. The processions traced the locations of wells, buried foundations, and other subsurface structures with an accuracy that suggested the children had access to detailed maps of the area's underground geography. More intriguingly, Father Magnus discovered that the children's routes connected locations where unusual phenomena had been reported over the past year. The processions linked the sites where Eric the Forgettable had been seen, the cottage where Bjorn Eriksson had lived before his disappearance, the monastery where Brother Adalbert had worked on his mysterious manuscript, and various other locations that had been associated with the strange dreams and visions that had been affecting the local population. Father Magnus's attempts to question the children about their game produced responses that were remarkable for their consistency and their complete lack of useful information. Every child interviewed provided essentially the same explanation. They played the game because it was fun. They knew where to walk because the paths were obvious, and they couldn't understand why adults found their activities confusing or concerning when pressed for more detailed explanations. The children would describe the paths they followed in terms that suggested they were visible features of the landscape. They spoke of the bright lines that connected different locations, the warm spots where they would gather before beginning their processions, and the singing stones that marked important waypoints along their routes. Adults who attempted to observe these features found nothing unusual about the locations the children described. The bright lines were invisible to adult eyes. The warm spots felt no different from the surrounding ground, and the singing stones appeared to be ordinary rocks that produced no sounds when touched or struck. However, Father Magnus noted that adults who spent extended periods observing the children's processions began to report unusual experiences. Several villagers claimed to have briefly glimpsed faint lines of light connecting the various locations visited by the children. Though these visions lasted only a few seconds and were dismissed as products of eye strain or imagination, other observers reported hearing faint musical tones that seemed to emanate from the stones that marked the children's waypoints, though the sounds were so quiet that they were often attributed to wind or distant activities. Most significantly, adults who watched the children's processions for extended periods began to experience vivid dreams featuring underground chambers and stone corridors, similar to the dreams that had been affecting the local population for the past year. Father Magnus's documentation of the children's game revealed that it was not limited to the village of Jelling, but was being played by children throughout the region. Correspondence with priests in neighboring parishes confirmed that children in communities as far as 20 miles away were engaging in similar processions, following routes that appeared to be part of a larger geometric pattern that extended across the entire area. The regional pattern created by the children's processions, when mapped by Father Magnus over a period of several weeks, formed a complex design that incorporated astronomical alignments and mathematical relationships that were beyond the understanding of 10th century European scholars. The pattern included references to lunar cycles, seasonal changes, and the positions of various stars and planets that would not be accurately calculated by European astronomers for several more centuries. Most remarkably, the children's routes connected locations throughout the region where evidence of the underground network had been discovered. The processions linked the sealed chamber beneath the Jelling burial grounds, the mysterious depression in Lake Tish where Bjorn Eriksson had found his warm stones, the monastery where Brother Adalbert had worked on his translated manuscript, and dozens of other sites where unusual phenomena had been reported. Father Magnus's investigation revealed that the children were not consciously aware of the connections between their game and the underground network. When questioned about their knowledge of the sealed chamber or the other mysterious locations, they expressed genuine confusion and claimed to have no particular interest in underground chambers or ancient mysteries. However, the children's dreams during this period were filled with detailed images of underground passages and stone chambers. Father Magnus's interviews with parents revealed that children throughout the region were experiencing remarkably similar dreams, featuring the same architectural elements, the same mysterious inhabitants, and the same sense of being guided through passages toward destinations that were never quite reached. Before waking, The dream experiences were apparently providing the children with the vital information they needed to trace the routes of their processions. The underground passages they explored in their sleep corresponded exactly to the surface routes they followed during their waking hours, suggesting that their game was somehow connected to their dream experiences of the hidden network. Father Magnus's most disturbing discovery was that the children's processions were gradually changing the landscape in ways that were almost imperceptible to casual observation. The routes they followed repeatedly were becoming slightly more defined over time, as though the constant passage of small feet was wearing paths that followed the underground passages beneath. More significantly, the locations where the children gathered at the beginning and end of their processions were showing signs of subtle alterations. The ground at these sites was becoming warmer and softer. Stones were shifting into more regular geometric arrangements, and vegetation was growing in patterns that reflected the mathematical relationships documented in the children's routes. These changes were so gradual that they would have been completely overlooked if not for Father Magnus's methodical documentation of the sites over extended periods. The alterations suggested that the children's activities were somehow activating or reactivating systems that had been dormant since the sealing of the underground chamber. Father Magnus's final report on the children's game, completed in August of 960 AD, concluded that their activities were serving as a form of maintenance procedure for the underground network. The processions were apparently keeping the system functional despite the disruption caused by the sealing of the primary access point, ensuring that the monitoring and influence capabilities remained operational even without direct human supervision. The report was forwarded to the Danish royal court, where it was filed among other documents dealing with unusual local phenomena and promptly forgotten. Father Magnus continued to monitor the children's activities until his own disappearance in September of 960 AD, when he was found missing from his morning prayers and was never seen again. The children continued to play their game throughout the autumn and winter, though their processions became less frequent as the weather grew colder. By spring of 961 AD, the game had evolved into a more complex activity that involved the creation of stone arrangements at various waypoints, designs that incorporated the same geometric patterns that had characterized their earlier processions. The stone arrangements the winter of 960 AD was remarkable primarily for its complete lack of remarkable features. The temperature remained within normal ranges. The snowfall was adequate but not excessive, and the frozen ground provided the kind of stable foundation that Danish farmers had learned to expect during the coldest months of the year. It was during this period of meteorological predictability that the stone arrangements began to appear throughout the Jelling region, manifesting so gradually and subtly that most adults dismissed them as natural formations or the meaningless play activities of bored children. The arrangements consisted of stones placed in geometric patterns that were mathematically precise but visually unremarkable. Most were composed of common field stones arranged in circles, spirals, or linear formations that could easily be mistaken for property boundaries, drainage features, or the remnants of abandoned construction projects. The arrangements appeared overnight, placed with such care that they seemed to have grown naturally from the landscape rather than being deliberately constructed. Brother Cornelius, the monastery's librarian, was among the first adults to recognize the significance of the stone arrangements, though his interest was initially motivated by concerns about potential pagan ritual activities rather than by any understanding of their more complex purposes. Brother Cornelius had been documenting various unusual phenomena in the region as part of his ongoing correspondence with other monasteries monasteries, and the stone arrangements represented a new category of unexplained activity that required investigation. Brother Cornelius's initial survey of the arrangements revealed that they were not randomly distributed, but followed specific patterns that corresponded to the routes the children had been tracing during their processions. The stone formations appeared at the same locations where the children had gathered at the beginning and end of their games, and incorporated the same geometric relationships that had characterized the children's walking patterns. More significantly, Brother Cornelius discovered that the arrangements were not static, but were gradually evolving over time. Stones would be added to existing formations, creating more complex patterns that incorporated additional mathematical relationships. The additions appeared to follow a predetermined plan, with each modification building upon previous elements, to create increasingly sophisticated designs. The precision of these modifications suggested that they were being carried out according to detailed instructions, though no evidence could be found of human involvement in the construction process. The stones were placed with mathematical accuracy that required careful measurement and calculation, yet no surveying tools or measuring devices were ever discovered at the sites. Brother Cornelius's documentation of the stone arrangements revealed that they were being constructed simultaneously at locations throughout the region, with modifications at different sites occurring in coordinated patterns that suggested communication between the various construction teams. However, surveillance of the sites failed to reveal any human activity during the hours when the arrangements were known to be changing. The mystery deepened when Brother Cornelius realized that the stone arrangements were incorporating elements that could not be explained by conventional construction techniques. Some formations included stones that were balanced in positions that appeared to defy gravitational forces, remaining stable despite having no apparent foundation or support structure. Other arrangements included stones that had been shaped or modified in ways that suggested the use of tools that were not available in 10th century Denmark. Some stones showed evidence of precise cutting that created perfectly smooth surfaces and exact geometric angles, while others had been carved with symbols that matched the unknown script found in the sealed chamber beneath the royal burial grounds. Most remarkably, Brother Cornelius discovered that the stone arrangements were producing measurable effects on their immediate environment. The temperature around the formations was consistently several degrees warmer than the surrounding area. Even during the coldest winter weather, vegetation near the arrangements grew more vigorously and remained green longer than plants in other locations. The arrangements also produced acoustic effects that were barely perceptible to human hearing but could be detected through careful observation. Each formation generated a faint humming sound that varied in frequency depending on weather conditions, time of day, and the phase of the moon. The humming sounds from different arrangements created harmonic relationships when heard simultaneously, producing complex musical patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles related to the geometric designs of the formations themselves. Brother Cornelius's investigation revealed that the acoustic effects were not random, but were apparently serving as a communication system. The humming sounds from different arrangements would synchronize at specific times, creating coordinated patterns that suggested the transmission of information between the various sites. The communication system appeared to be most active during the night hours, particularly during periods when the moon was not visible. Brother Cornelius's nighttime observations revealed that the humming sounds would increase in volume and complexity during these dark periods, creating intricate musical compositions that could be heard from considerable distances. More intriguingly, The acoustic communications seemed to be connected to the dream experiences that were still affecting the local population. Brother Cornelius noted that people who lived near the stone arrangements reported particularly vivid dreams on nights when the humming sounds were most active, and that the content of their dreams often corresponded to the mathematical patterns created by the acoustic frequencies. The dreams consistently featured the same underground chambers and stone corridors that had been reported throughout the region, but with increasing levels of detail and complexity. Dreamers described encounters with the tall, thin inhabitants of the underground network, conversations conducted through telepathic communication, and guided tours of chambers that contained sophisticated mechanical devices made from stone and light. Most significantly, the dreams were providing dreamers with information about the stone, arrangements that they could not have acquired through normal observation. People would dream about specific modifications that would be made to nearby formations, and would wait to find that the predicted changes had actually occurred during the night. Brother Cornelius's documentation of these dream prophecies revealed that they were not random but followed logical patterns that suggested the dreamers were receiving actual information about planned modifications to the stone arrangements. The predictions were accurate in terms of timing, location, and specific details of the changes that would be made. This discovery led Brother Cornelius to hypothesize that the stone arrangements were serving as interface devices between the underground network and the surface population. The formations were apparently designed to enhance and focus the telepathic communication capabilities of the network's inhabitants, allowing them to transmit information more effectively to sleeping humans. The hypothesis was supported by Brother Cornelius's observation that people who spent time near the stone arrangements became increasingly sensitive to telepathic influences. Individuals who lived within close proximity to the formations reported enhanced dream experiences, improved memory of dream content, and occasional moments of spontaneous knowledge about events occurring in distant locations. Some individuals developed the ability to receive telepathic communications while awake, though these experiences were typically dismissed as imagination or religious inspiration. Brother Cornelius documented several cases of people who claimed to receive direct mental communications from the underground network's inhabitants, providing them with information about historical events, geographical features, and future occurrences that could later be verified through independent investigation. The most remarkable case involved a local farmer named Ragnar the Unremarkable, who began experiencing telepathic communications shortly after a stone arrangement was constructed in his field. Ragnar reported receiving detailed information about agricultural techniques that were unknown in 10th century Europe but would later be validated by modern farming science. The telepathic communications provided Ragnar with knowledge about soil chemistry, crop rotation patterns, and pest management strategies that allowed him to achieve crop yields that were significantly higher than those of his neighbors. The information was presented in a format that Ragnar understood as practical farming advice, though the underlying scientific principles were beyond his conscious comprehension. Brother Cornelius's investigation of Ragnar's case revealed that similar telepathic communications were being received by other individuals throughout the region, though most recipients were reluctant to discuss their experiences openly. The communications typically provided practical information that was immediately useful to the recipients, suggesting that the underground network's inhabitants were working to improve conditions for the surface population through the gradual introduction of advanced knowledge. Brother Cornelius's final report on the stone arrangements, completed in March of 961 AD, concluded that they represented a sophisticated communication and influence system that was being used to establish more direct contact between the underground network and the surface population. The arrangements were apparently serving as amplifiers and focusing devices for telepathic transmissions, allowing the network's inhabitants to provide guidance and information more effectively than had been possible through dream manipulation. Alone, the report noted that the stone arrangements were continuing to evolve and expand, with new formations appearing regularly and existing arrangements becoming increasingly complex. Brother Cornelius predicted that the communication system would eventually reach a level of sophistication that would allow for routine telepathic contact between the surface population and the underground network's inhabitants. Brother Cornelius disappeared 3 days after completing his report, leaving behind only a carefully arranged collection of stones in his monastery, cell that formed a perfect spiral pattern around his writing desk. The arrangement produced the same faint humming sound that had been observed at the other stone formations, and continued to emit acoustic frequencies for several weeks after his disappearance. The assembly of Mindspring arrived in 961 AD with the same punctual reliability that had characterized the changing seasons throughout the recorded history of Denmark. The snow melted at the expected rate, the ground thawed according to its usual schedule, and the first green shoots of new vegetation appeared exactly when they were supposed to. This seasonal predictability provided a reassuring backdrop for events that were becoming increasingly extraordinary, though they were presented in such mundane terms that most observers failed to recognize their significance. The first indication that something unprecedented was occurring came from the village baker, Olaf the consistently average, who reported that his customers had begun placing orders for bread in quantities that followed mathematical patterns. Instead of requesting the usual amounts based on family size and economic circumstances, people were ordering bread in numbers that corresponded to geometric sequences, prime number progressions, and other mathematical relationships that were beyond the conscious understanding of 10th century Danish villagers. Olaf, whose mathematical education extended no further than basic counting and simple addition, was initially concerned that his customers had developed some form of collective mental disorder that was affecting their ability to make rational purchasing decisions. However, he noted that the mathematical patterns in their orders were consistent and purposeful, suggesting that the unusual behavior was guided by some form of systematic intelligence rather than random. Confusion, the phenomenon, was not limited to bread purchases. Throughout the village, people began engaging in activities that followed mathematical patterns without being consciously aware of the mathematical relationships involved. Farmers planted their crops in arrangements that corresponded to complex geometric designs. Merchants organized their goods according to sequences that reflected advanced numerical theories, and craftsmen began creating objects that incorporated mathematical relationships that wouldn't be understood by European scholars for several more centuries. The village blacksmith, Harold the adequately skilled, found himself forging tools and weapons in quantities that followed Fibonacci sequences, though he had never heard of such mathematical concepts and couldn't explain why he felt compelled to produce exactly 8 horseshoes after completing 5. Followed by 13 arrow points after finishing the horseshoes. When questioned about his unusual production patterns, Harold could only say that the numbers felt right and that working in other quantities produced a vague sense of unease and incompleteness. Similar patterns emerged in every aspect of village life. Children automatically arrange themselves in geometric formations during their games. Women organized their spinning and weaving activities according to mathematical progressions, and men found themselves walking routes that traced complex equations across the landscape. The behavior was so pervasive that it had become the new normal within a matter of weeks, with villagers accepting their mathematical compulsions as natural and unremarkable. The underlying cause of this collective behavioral shift became apparent to Brother Anselm, the monastery's newest scholar, who had been documenting the various unusual phenomena affecting the region as part of his theological studies. Brother Anselm's investigation revealed that the mathematical behaviors were being coordinated through the stone arrangements that had been appearing throughout the area, which were apparently serving as broadcast devices for telepathic influences. They were more sophisticated and powerful than anything previously documented. Brother Anselm's analysis of the behavioral patterns revealed that they were not random but were working together to create a larger design that encompassed the entire Jelling region, the farmers' crop arrangements, the merchants' organizational systems, the craftsmen's production patterns, and the villagers' movement routes were all contributing to a massive, geometric pattern that was only visible when viewed from elevated positions or when mapped over extended periods of observation. The pattern created by the collective behavior of the population incorporated the same mathematical relationships that appeared in the stone arrangements, suggesting that the two phenomena were part of a coordinated system designed to achieve specific objectives that were beyond the understanding of the individual participants. The villagers were essentially functioning as components in a vast calculating machine, performing mathematical operations through their daily activities without being conscious of their participation in the larger computational process. Brother Anselm's investigation revealed that the computational system was apparently being used to solve problems related to astronomical calculations, geographical surveys, and various other technical challenges that required mathematical precision. Beyond the capabilities of 10th century European scholars, the collective activities of the population were generating solutions to complex equations that were then somehow transmitted through the stone arrangements to recipients, who could make use of the calculated results. Most remarkably, Brother Anselm discovered that the computational system was producing practical benefits for the participants, despite their lack of conscious understanding of their mathematical activities. Farmers who planted their crops according to the mathematically guided patterns achieved higher yields than those who followed traditional methods. Craftsmen who organized their work according to the telepathically influenced sequences produced goods that were of superior quality and durability. The mathematical influences were apparently designed to optimize various aspects of daily life, while simultaneously generating solutions to complex technical problems. The system represented a form of symbiotic relationship between the underground network's inhabitants and the surface population, with both groups benefiting from the collaborative computational activities. Brother Anselm's documentation of the phenomenon revealed that it was not limited to the immediate Jelling area, but was occurring throughout Denmark and southern Sweden. Correspondence with scholars in other regions confirmed that similar patterns of mathematically influenced behavior were affecting populations across Scandinavia, all apparently coordinated through networks of stone arrangements that had been appearing simultaneously in multiple locations. The regional coordination of the mathematical behaviors suggested that the underground network's inhabitants were implementing a systematic program designed to enhance the capabilities of the surface population while advancing their own technological and scientific objectives. The program appeared to be introducing advanced mathematical and scientific concepts gradually, in forms that could be absorbed and applied. by medieval populations without causing social disruption or religious conflict. Brother Anselm's investigation also revealed that the mathematical influences were producing subtle but significant changes in the cognitive abilities of the affected population. People who had been participating in the mathematically guided activities for extended periods showed improvements in problem-solving skills, pattern recognition abilities, and spatial reasoning capabilities that persisted even when they were not directly engaged in the influenced behaviors. These cognitive enhancements were apparently permanent modifications that were being introduced gradually to avoid detection by the affected individuals. The improvements were subtle enough to be attributed to natural variation in human abilities, but consistent enough to represent genuine advancement in the intellectual capabilities of the population. Most significantly, Brother Anselm discovered that the cognitive enhancements were being passed on to children, born to parents who had been affected by the mathematical influences. The children showed advanced mathematical and spatial reasoning abilities from early ages, though their enhanced capabilities were expressed through play activities and practical skills rather than through formal mathematical education. The generational transmission of the cognitive enhancements suggested that the underground network's inhabitants were implementing a long-term program designed to gradually upgrade the intellectual capabilities of the human population. The program was apparently designed to prepare humanity for more advanced forms of technological and scientific development while maintaining the appearance of natural evolutionary progress. Brother Anselm's final report on the mathematical influences, completed in June of 961 AD, concluded that the phenomenon represented the most sophisticated form of psychological manipulation ever documented in human history. The underground network's inhabitants had apparently developed techniques for modifying human behavior and cognitive capabilities with such precision that the affected individuals remained completely unaware of the changes being made to their minds. The report warned that the implications of such advanced manipulation techniques extended far beyond the immediate Jelling region, suggesting that similar programs might be operating throughout the world without detection by the affected populations. Brother Anselm concluded that humanity's technological and cultural development might have been guided by external influences for much longer periods than previously suspected. Brother Anselm disappeared the night after completing his report, though his disappearance differed from the mysterious vanishings that had affected other investigators of the phenomenon. Instead of simply vanishing without explanation, Brother Anselm left behind a detailed note explaining that he had been invited to join the underground network's inhabitants in their ongoing research activities. The note described Brother Anselm's growing understanding of the network's objectives and his voluntary decision to participate in their scientific programs. He wrote about the opportunity to contribute to research projects that would benefit humanity's long-term development, and about his excitement at the prospect of working with beings whose scientific knowledge was centuries ahead of anything available to surface dwellers. Brother Anselm's final message to his colleagues included detailed instructions for continuing his documentation of the mathematical influences, along with recommendations for additional research projects that would help to understand the full scope of the underground network's activities. He concluded by stating that his departure should not be viewed as a disappearance, but as a promotion to a more advanced level of scientific collaboration. The mathematical influences continued to affect the population throughout the summer and autumn of 961 AD, gradually becoming more sophisticated and incorporating increasingly complex mathematical relationships. By winter, the collective computational activities of the regional population had evolved into a system that was apparently capable of solving problems that would challenge modern supercomputers. The final convergence winter returned to Denmark in 961 AD with the same methodical predictability that had characterized its arrival for countless generations. The temperature dropped according to its usual schedule. The first snows fell at the expected times, and the frozen ground provided the kind of stable foundation that Danish farmers had learned to anticipate during the coldest months of the year. It was against this backdrop of seasonal normalcy that the various threads of mystery that had been weaving through the Jelling region for the past 3 years finally began to converge into a pattern that was both inevitable and completely unexpected. The convergence began with a series of dreams that affected every resident of the region. Simultaneously, on the night of December 21st, the winter solstice, unlike the individual dream experiences that had been occurring sporadically over the past years, this collective dream event was experienced by every person in the area at exactly the same time, creating a shared psychological experience that connected hundreds of minds in a single, coordinated vision. The dream took place in the vast underground complex that had been glimpsed in fragments by various individuals over the past 3 years. However, this time the dreamers were not exploring the complex as confused visitors, but were participating in it as welcomed guests, guided by the tall, thin inhabitants through chambers and passages that revealed the full scope and purpose of the underground network. The custodians, as the inhabitants identified themselves, provided a comprehensive explanation of their activities and objectives through the telepathic communication system that connected all participants in the shared dream. They revealed that they were indeed the descendants of the Silent Builders, an ancient civilization that had developed advanced scientific and technological capabilities thousands of years before the emergence of known human cultures. The Silent Builders had constructed the underground network as a research facility designed to study and guide the development of newer civilizations that emerged on the Earth's surface. Their descendants, the custodians, had continued this research mission for millennia, observing and subtly influencing the development of human societies through carefully controlled interventions in individual consciousness and collective behavior. The shared dream provided dreamers with access to historical records that documented the custodians' involvement in major developments throughout human history. The invention of agriculture, the establishment of early cities, the development of writing systems, and the spread of various religious and philosophical movements had all been guided by custodian influences, implemented through the same dream. Manipulation and telepathic communication techniques that had been affecting the Jelling region. However, the dreamers learned that the custodians' mission was not simply to guide human development according to their own preferences. They were apparently engaged in a collaborative research project that involved multiple species and civilizations, both terrestrial and extraterrestrial, working together to solve problems related to consciousness, intelligence, and the nature of reality itself. The underground network was revealed to be part of a much larger system that extended beyond Earth, connecting research facilities on multiple planets and in various dimensions that existed in parallel to conventional physical reality. The network served as a communication and coordination system for scientific collaboration that transcended the limitations of space, time, and physical existence. The research project that engaged the custodians and their collaborators involved the investigation of entities known as the Deep Dreamers, beings that existed primarily in the realm of consciousness and fed on the psychic energy generated by intelligent minds. The Deep Dreamers represented a form of parasitic intelligence that threatened to dominate, and ultimately consume the consciousness of any species that achieves sufficient technological and scientific development.